Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike. You guys are rocking with me on Mike's Intellectual Corner. On today's episode, we are diving back into our Napoleonic Wars series. This is Napoleon in 1813, Battle of the Nations. As we all know, this is Battle of Leipzig. And without further ado, we're just going to go right into it. So let's...
October 1813. Napoleon Bonaparte faced his greatest crisis since becoming Emperor of the French 9 years before. His long war in Spain had ended in defeat, and an Anglo-Spanish-Portuguese army had now crossed the Pyrenees to invade France itself. In Germany, the Kingdom of Bavaria had switched sides and joined the Sixth Coalition against France. While in Saxony, Napoleon faced four armies converging on him from all directions. What's more, these were not the same bunglers he'd crushed in 1805 and 6 at Austerlitz and Jena. Prussia, Austria and Russia had all learned from their mistakes. They were now better organized, trained and led, and more wary of Napoleon.
And I would hope so, because I mean, if we think about it, it's been almost over 20 years now, since like 1793, I think, with the siege of Toulon, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a very big minute. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like half these, Napoleon has teenagers fighting in his army right now, so that means there's this war and this fighting has been going on longer than some of the people fighting in his army. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's been going on. So I would hope so that they've, started to catch on a little bit, at least,
Wary of Napoleon. The largest coalition force was the Army of Bohemia, commanded by Austrian Field Marshal the Prince of Schwarzenberg. His was a huge mixed Austrian-Russian-Prussian army of 194,000 men and 790 guns. To the north, Blücher's Army of Silesia and the Army of the North under Napoleon's ex-Marshal Bernadotte, now Crown Prince of Sweden. Together, 130,000 men and 536 guns. To the southeast, General Bennigsen's Army of Poland, besieging Dresden. Another 34,000 men and 135 guns. In total, the coalition had fielded 360,000 men and 1,500 guns, with Russia supplying the bulk of the troops.
Well, in my opinion, the real question is, out of those 360,000 men, how many are actually cavalry? Because, I mean, as we already know, freaking Napoleon has a 2% of what he used to have in terms of cavalry. Because he lost 90% of his, he lost like hundreds of thousands of forces out there in the retreat. So I feel like if they have the bigger cavalry, that they pretty much almost win. Because obviously those infantry squares are a different breed, so you just never know.
One unique addition to Bernadotte's Army of the North was a single troop of British rocket artillery, an experimental weapon system based on the Congreve rocket, a type seen here in 1830. Although wildly inaccurate, their high-explosive warhead could be devastating at close range.
It almost looks like the grandfather of like a mortar or something like that, you know what I'm saying? Except for the fact that you have to light it from the back still, but it almost looks like the grandfather of the mortar, the modern day mortar and mortar crew.
Accurate. Their high-explosive warhead could be devastating at close range. Napoleon's forces around Leipzig were outnumbered almost 2 to 1. But with 200,000 men and 700 guns, the Grande Armée was still a force to be reckoned with many experienced troops and commanders, even though it increasingly relied on young conscripts to make up numbers. There were another 140,000 men that Napoleon could not call on.
Yeah, I guess, what I'm saying, that's where Napoleon still had a good obviously, like you said, a good advantage. But some of it, as we are about to see too, some of these people, some of these leaders, and some of these troops are about to defect to the other side. So let's see.
Men that Napoleon could not call on. General Rapp's 10th Corps besieged in Danzig, Marshal Saint-Cyr's 1st Corps besieged in Dresden, Marshal Davout's 13th Corps holding Hamburg, as well as several smaller besieged garrisons across Germany and Poland. Napoleon was currently about 20 miles north of Leipzig with the bulk of his army. Marshal Murat was 40 miles to the south with 90,000 men, covering Schwarzenberg. Napoleon now decided to rapidly join Murat, and with their temporary superiority in numbers, defeat Schwarzenberg, before Bernadotte and Blücher could intervene. Murat had orders to conduct a fighting withdrawal northwards. But at Liebert-Volkwitz, he was drawn into major combat with the enemy's advance guard. Around 12,000 horsemen fought what some have described as the largest cavalry battle in Europe's history. Murat, in the thick of it as usual, was very nearly captured by Prussian dragoons.
Of course he was. He's freaking sitting there with a huge feathery hat. What'd you expect?
The battle ended in a minor coalition victory, with around 2,000 casualties on each side. The next day, Napoleon arrived to take command.
Yeah, that statement definitely, you can tell they knew that they were about to go into a battle that was going to go down in essentially the history books for the rest of time, which is such a sombering thought. You know what I'm saying? Like, that has to be the same thought that they had on, you know, D-Day and stuff like that. You know, it's just, this is a once in a lifetime type of battle, and you know, I get to be a part of it. Let's try and make it through it. You know.
By the 16th of October, Napoleon had concentrated most of his forces south of Leipzig. Field Marshal Schwarzenberg, meanwhile, against Russian advice, had deployed his army on either side of the Pleiße River, which would hinder...
Yeah, that was pretty stupid. I don't know why he would do that. I mean, obviously there's a huge river system right there, so it looks like he just probably felt like there wasn't that many choices for him, but still.
Marshal Schwarzenberg, meanwhile, against Russian advice, had deployed his army on either side of the Pleiße River, which would hinder his movements throughout the battle. Napoleon had entrusted the northern sector to Marshal Ney, with orders to keep an eye out for Blücher and Bernadotte. But Napoleon didn't expect them for at least another day, and so Ney had orders to transfer most of his troops south for the attack on Schwarzenberg. Schwarzenberg, however, knew that Blücher and Bernadotte were closer than Napoleon suspected, and that Bennigsen was also marching up from Dresden. This was the moment the coalition had been waiting for. All their armies converging on Napoleon, with overwhelming superiority in numbers. However, the coalition's headquarters were nothing like Napoleon's, where one man's will decided all. Schwarzenberg had to attempt to coordinate the actions of 3 large armies from 3 separate states. And although he was commander-in-chief, his plans still needed to be approved by Emperor Alexander, the supreme commander.
Yeah, all of whom was obviously not giving him probably any say-so of any war plan. They were probably making it up themselves and then letting him, you know, essentially do his thing with those plans or whatever. Especially if Alexander is the supreme commander, he should have made one of his, Marshall's supreme commander and just let them do their thing. But let's see how that goes. But it's still pretty crazy though. That's like 5 different languages and cultures and stuff trying to do this, so that's still pretty impressive.
Needed to be approved by Emperor Alexander, the supreme commander, whilst he also managed relations with the King of Prussia and the Emperor of Austria, all of whom were present at his headquarters. The plan finally agreed was for General Wittgenstein's corps group to lead an attack in 4 main columns, with 2 Austrian flanking attacks west of the Pleiße. At 8 a.m, a bombardment began along the line, as Russian, Austrian and Prussian infantry regiments advanced across cold, muddy fields. Wachau soon fell to Russian infantry, but French artillery fire made it impossible for them to advance further. Victor's Second Corps then counterattacked, retaking the village at bayonet point. Wachau would change hands twice more that morning. These bloody contests for small Saxon...
Is that not the same freaking style of fighting in every single Napoleonic battle, you know what I'm saying? Especially whenever they're trying to get a city or a little town or a city or something like that, it always either changes hands, or if it's not changing hands, it has some of the craziest fighting, because they're doing 1800 or freaking 19th century fighting in a city area, which is insane to think about, because those tactics are usually meant for like open fields and stuff, you know what I'm saying? Like being able to stay in close. You can't really do that with buildings and stuff, and you know what I'm saying? It's just crazy.
Twice more that morning. These bloody contests for small Saxon villages would come to typify the fighting around Leipzig. At Markkleeberg, Kleist's Prussian Second Corps drove out the Polish defenders after bitter fighting, while on the left bank of the Pleiße, Merveldt's Austrian Second Corps struggled across broken ground to attack well-defended villages. Their assault on Konnewitz stalled, but with heavy losses, the Austrians got a toehold in Dörlitz. On the right flank, around 10 a.m, Klenau's 4th Corps occupied the high ground of the Kolmberg and fought its way into Liebert-Wolkwitz. Napoleon, observing from Gallows Hill, ordered up Augereau's 9th Corps and the Young Guard in support. MacDonald's 11th Corps was now also arriving.
Obviously it's good that he has the numbers now for these attacks, but obviously we still have to remember he has the Swedish and another Russian whatchamacallit coming up from the north, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, he has still 2 armies coming from the north, and they're closer than he actually thinks.
Arriving in position on his left. His troops retook the Kolmberg and counterattacked Liebert-Wolkwitz, driving out the Austrians and pursuing them over the fields beyond. The advance was only halted when Russian Cossacks were sighted on their open left flank, a warning that Bennigsen's army was not far off. The coalition offensive was going nowhere, with most of its modest gains lost to French counterattacks. But there was one sector where the coalition had more success that morning. General Goulay's Austrian Third Corps, with orders to threaten Napoleon's line of retreat, advanced over marshy ground towards Lindenau. Ney had to divert Bertrand's Fourth Corps to reinforce the village and ensure the road to France was kept open. Napoleon was waiting for Ney's reinforcements before launching his attack on Schwarzenberg, but now Fourth Corps was tied down at Lindenau, and there was more bad news from Ney. Blücher's army of Silesia was approaching from the northwest. Marmont's 6th Corps had to turn about to keep the Prussians at...
Yeah, and we also have to remember, this is Napoleonic times. There are no radios, there are no any of that. So all these different things are being relayed, like, if I'm not mistaken, through horseback. If I'm not even mistaken, so this isn't being relayed immediately. So Napoleon's probably still thinking that he's on his way. In reality, no, he's not. So you might want to think of something else, because your plan's about to...
had to turn about to keep the Prussians at bay. Heavy fighting broke out around Möckern, the village itself held by elite French Marines, while Dąbrowski's Polish division clung on to Widrich, under attack from an entire Russian corps. This was a nasty surprise for Napoleon, who'd thought Blücher was still a day's march away. But the old Prussian general, hearing cannon fire to the south, had urged his men on and into the attack. Blücher intended to draw as many French troops onto himself as possible to assist Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia. His actions and the bloody fight for Möckern may just have saved the coalition from defeat. Napoleon was outnumbered across the whole battlefield, but in the south he still had a numerical advantage, not as large as he'd hoped, nor likely to last long. Schwarzenberg and Alexander were already moving up reserves, though Schwarzenberg now found that his were on the wrong side of the Pleiße River, costing precious.
Which is funny because he should have already known that when he got there, and they warned him, like, you sure you want to do that? Because you have a river on both sides of you. That's not, like, how's that ideal? Maybe for a headquarters location, but not for active moving troops. That just sounds stupid.
Now found that his were on the wrong side of the Pleiße River, costing precious hours. It was now or never for Napoleon. At 2 p.m, he ordered the attack to begin. A grand battery of 180 guns blasted the enemy lines. Then Victor's 2nd Corps, Lauriston's 5th Corps, and the Young Guard began their advance. In support, Murat gathered 2 entire cavalry corps, 10,000 horsemen, and led them in one of the great mass cavalry charges of the Napoleonic Wars. Cuirassiers of the 1st Heavy Cavalry Division broke through to the main enemy battery. Some even nearly reached the 3 coalition monarchs. But the ground was marshy and broken by fences and ditches. The French horses were soon exhausted and the squadrons disordered.
So yeah, let's see how, it's kind of crazy how, like, you know what I'm saying, these different battles are dictated by just weather. It could be something as simple as weather, you know what I'm saying? And it's crazy that, obviously without that marshy ground and stuff like that, I mean, damn, we could have seen the death of 3 different, you know what I'm saying, kings and stuff like that. Who knows what that would have done for the history of Europe? Because then there would have been nobody to. I mean, obviously they have, you know, they're next in line and stuff like that. But still, it's just like 3 monarchs in one fell swoop. Like, that's never been done. So that's just insane to. You know,
and the squadrons disordered. Austrian cuirassiers and Russian Guard cavalry were coming up from the south. When these fresh Allied cavalry reserves charged the French, a great melee ensued. But the French were eventually driven back to their start line. Maison's division of the 5th Corps was involved in a desperate struggle for Geldengosse. The fighting swept back and forth through the village, the streets filling with dead and wounded from both sides. But as Russian and Prussian Guard regiments arrived to reinforce the village, the French were forced to fall back. Around 4 p.m, the Austrian Reserve Corps finally arrived and renewed the assault on Markkleeberg, one of the morning's objectives, which was finally secured. By 5 p.m, it was clear that Napoleon didn't have enough reserves to force a decisive outcome in the south. To the north, Möckern was being stubbornly held by French Marines with lethal close-range artillery support. But despite terrible losses, York's Prussian Corps continued to attack. Marshal Marmont himself was wounded twice, but remained in command. Finally, a brilliant charge by Prussian hussars triggered a French rout. Möckern fell, as Marmont's corps streamed back towards Leipzig. As dusk fell around 6 p.m.
It's almost insane to see like how open they're. Like if you notice, they're kind of set up like this a little bit, where they have a huge opening right here and a huge opening right there, and it's kind of crazy that we haven't seen, like, you know what I'm saying, the Swedish troops or anything yet, because that definitely looks like something that they're about to take advantage of if they can get up there pretty soon. Let's see what happens.
As dusk fell around 6 p.m, fighting died out across the battlefield. The first day of the battle had cost the French an estimated 25,000 casualties. The coalition, at least 30,000. Napoleon had come close, but failed to land a decisive blow. The chance for victory was slipping from his grasp. Sunday the 17th of October brought a lull, with both armies exhausted by the previous day's fighting. Napoleon needed to rest his troops and resupply them with ammunition, which was running dangerously low. He also sent a message to his father-in-law, Emperor Francis I, suggesting an armistice and finally offering concessions. But the Allies were no longer interested. They knew time was on their side.
Yeah, unfortunately, in any type of peace treaty, once you have the underground and your opposition has the higher ground, or whatever you want to say, it's you can't do anything. You have to wait until either you have the upper ground or you're messed up. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna get everything that they want. You're pretty much gonna have to deal with, because otherwise, you know what I'm saying, it's just, they're just going to pounce on you even harder. They know that obviously there's something, you're asking for peace for a reason. So it might, and obviously we know it's because his troops are you're kind of weak right now and low ammunition, and on top of some other stuff.
They knew time was on their side. The only major combat that day occurred in the north, where Blücher continued to attack. Russian infantry stormed Eutrich and Gorlice. Russian hussars charged and routed part of Arrighi's 3rd Cavalry Corps. That day, Napoleon received 14,000 reinforcements when Reynier's French Saxon 7th Corps arrived from the northeast. But the same day, the coalition received more than 100,000 reinforcements, as their armies continued to converge on Leipzig. Colorado's Austrian 1st Corps, Bennigsen's Army of Poland, and Bernadotte's Army of the North, though the latter was widely criticised for his leisurely march to the battlefield. The next day...
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like Bernadotte should have been there a lot sooner, because, I mean, in the beginning, did we not hear that they were closer than previously thought? So, you know what I'm saying, why did it still take a whole day and a half to still get there, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, they probably were hot down.
Leisurely march to the battlefield. The next day, Napoleon would face odds of nearly 2-1. It was time for the Emperor to begin planning his retreat. On Monday morning, the sun shone across 40 square miles of battlefield, on which nearly 500,000 troops and 2,000 cannon were assembled. Soldiers from France, Germany, Russia, Austria, Poland, Italy, Sweden, the Netherlands, and even Britain. This was truly the Battle of the Nations. In preparation for his withdrawal, Napoleon pulled back his forces into a tighter defensive perimeter, and ordered Bertrand's 4th Corps to march west to secure the army's line of retreat. 2 divisions of the Young Guard under Marshal Mortier took their place at Lindenau. Schwarzenberg, meanwhile, planned to close the net on Napoleon with 6 converging attacks. Fighting in the south began around 8 AM. The Austrians took Dörlitz, but Marshal Oudinot led a counterattack at the head of a Young Guard division and drove them out again. Schwarzenberg was so alarmed by this reverse that he sent orders to recall Goulay's 3rd Corps. General Barclay's troops initially faced little opposition as they took Wachau and Liebert-Volkwitz, scenes of such bitter fighting 2 days before, but now scarcely defended. Barclay then paused, waiting for Bennigsen to get into position on his right before continuing his attack. Bennigsen's troops had more ground to cover, but towards noon they'd driven back MacDonald's infantry and taken their objectives. They would now wait for Bernadotte's army to link up on their right. But the Army of the North was again making slow progress, for which many again blamed its commander, who seemed exceedingly cautious about facing his old master in battle. Blücher.
I mean, can you blame him though? Like, he's never faced Napoleon, but he knows exactly what Napoleon's capable of. He knows he has strategic moves that he does, you know what I'm saying? That it doesn't matter how outnumbered he is or whatever, those strategic moves always prevail. So that's why he's probably a little afraid, a little scared.
Right? Cautious about facing his old master in battle. Blücher, in contrast, did not hesitate to launch Russian infantry against Leipzig's northern defences, though their attack failed with heavy losses. By 2 PM, Napoleon was hard-pressed on all fronts, but holding his own. His attention was now focused on Probstheide, key to his southern front, under attack from Kleist's Prussian 2nd Corps. French troops had turned the village into a fortress and inflicted terrible losses on the advancing Prussians. Probstheide was soon engulfed in smoke and fire as fighting raged on all sides. Some Prussian regiments lost half their men attacking the village, while 3 French generals were killed as they organised its defence. Napoleon even sent in Friant's division of the Guard to reinforce the position. To the north, Bernadotte's army was finally joining the battle in earnest. Marmont had assembled 137 guns around Schönefeld, which poured fire into the Russian ranks. In response, Bernadotte massed 200 guns of his own. The fields were soon strewn with the dead and wounded, as the sheer weight of fire made it impossible for either side to advance. Around 3 PM, von Bülow's Prussian Corps, supported by Austrian Jaegers and its small British rocket detachment, attacked Paunsdorf.
I'm sure that just the sheer weight of fire and the sheer rate of smoke, gunpowder in the air, you know what I'm saying, all that stuff, just people, and they're talking about dead bodies all over the ground. You got huge dead, big body, horse bodies all over the ground, all that stuff. It's just, yeah, these wars are just real savage. I'm not even gonna lie to you, but it's kind of crazy that, you know what I'm saying, these men back in these days just did this over and over and over again. Honestly, just kind of makes you feel like, you know, like
Prussian Corps, supported by Austrian Jaegers and its small British rocket detachment, attacked Paunsdorf. Reynier's 7th Corps could not withstand the onslaught. An hour later, around 3,000 Saxon soldiers rushed over to the enemy and surrendered. The Saxons were deeply disillusioned with their French allies. Their main wish now was for a quick end to a war that had ravaged their homeland for many months. The hole in the line created by the Saxons' defection was soon plugged by Guard cavalry. But the coalition juggernaut could not be stopped.
I mean, that's pretty true too, because I mean, you guys got to remember too, all of these freaking battles are all taking place outside of France's borders, even though they're all has to do with France. So all of these different, allies that are helping them, you know what I'm saying, I can see why they're starting to defect, because it's like, you know what I'm saying, like, our homeland is getting tore up. My town is set on fire. Where's your town? You know what I'm saying? It's just crazy to think about, but yeah.
Towards dusk, under relentless Russian pressure, Marmont abandoned the burning ruins of Schönefeld, while the Prussians took Sellerhausen. In the south, Probstheide still held, but the situation was grim for Napoleon. The third day's fighting cost both sides another 25,000 casualties. Napoleon's army was exhausted, outnumbered, virtually encircled, and critically low on ammunition.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't started doing his retreat in, you know what I'm saying, a little bit more earnest. You know, he's trying to get a little more of those people out, because, I mean, at this point, he has to see the painting on the wall that this isn't winnable, and that's all he really can do. That way he can fight another day, but let's see.
Napoleon's army was exhausted, outnumbered, virtually encircled, and critically low on ammunition. Finally, the Emperor gave the order to retreat. Overnight, under cover of darkness and early morning fog, the French army withdrew behind Leipzig's walls, and at 4 a.m. began its retreat west, crossing the single bridge over the Elster River that led back to France. There'd been time and materials to build extra bridges, but in what would prove a serious oversight, no one had given the necessary orders. Furthermore, there was no clear plan for Leipzig's defence, which was left to a jumble of under-strength units, mostly Poles and Germans. Napoleon left Leipzig around 10 a.m. Behind him there were scenes of mounting chaos and confusion, the city's streets jammed with troops, guns and wagons. The 20,000 wounded troops in the city had little hope of escape. 30 minutes later, shells began to rain on the city as the coalition launched an all-out assault from north, east and south. The rearguard held the city's gates.
Yeah, it's just crazy how Napoleon is with his troops. Like, he really does not give a crap about these men, but they give so much for him. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is this, the almost 5th, 6th time that he's done, you know what I'm saying, left in a huge group and just left so many people behind? I mean, wounded people have families too, you know what I'm saying? Like, they want to get back to their house. Just because you lost a leg doesn't mean you don't have a child at home, you know what I'm saying? So it's just kind of messed up to think about. But
for as long as they could, but they were soon overwhelmed by the enemy, and savage street fighting broke out across the city. A barge packed with gunpowder had been moored beneath the Elster Bridge so that it could be quickly destroyed after the rearguard crossed. Around 2 p.m, a corporal lit the fuse when he saw Russian soldiers on the far bank, even though the bridge was still packed with troops, wagons and horses. The bridge was destroyed in a gigantic explosion, that trapped 30,000 men and 30 generals on the wrong side of the river. Panic broke out among those who suddenly found themselves cut off. Most became prisoners, but some tried to swim for it, including
to be honest with you, at that point, a corporal did what a corporal was going to do. You know what I'm saying? Usually a corporal is going to be around the ages of probably 17 to freaking 20. So yeah, he's going to panic once he saw that. Obviously, he should have given them a little bit more time, because it's going to take them some time to get to him. You know what I'm saying? So, and if anything, it would have been better for him to blow it while the freaking Russians were on that motherfucker. But yeah, what are you going to do? You know what I'm saying? What are you going to do?
Most became prisoners, but some tried to swim for it, including the Polish Prince Poniatowski, made a marshal by Napoleon just 3 days before. Weak from his wounds, he rode his horse into the river, but as it tried to climb the steep far bank, it rolled over him, and he was drowned. Marshal MacDonald had also been cut off by the blast, and resolved to escape or die trying. He found a place where engineers had cut down 2 trees as a makeshift bridge, and made his attempt. And there I was, 1 foot on either trunk and the abyss below me. A high wind was blowing. I was wearing a large cloak, and fearing that someone would grab at it, I got rid of it. I was already 3/4 of the way across when some men decided to follow me. Their unsteady feet caused the trunks to shake, and I fell into the water. Fortunately, I could touch the bottom, but the bank was steep, the soil loose and slippery. Some of the enemy's skirmishers came up. They fired at me point blank and missed me, and some of our men who happened to be nearby drove them off and helped me out. I was wet from head to foot, breathless and sweating heavily from my efforts. Marshal Marmont, who had got across early in the day, gave me a horse. I wanted dry clothes more, but they were not to be had.
Ugh, and yeah, can you imagine being those freaking 1800s straight wool freaking uniforms and wet? Yeah, that probably added another freaking 200 pounds to that.
The loss of the bridge turned what was already a heavy defeat for Napoleon into a disastrous one. Later that day, the 3 Allied monarchs met in the centre of Leipzig to celebrate their great victory. It had come at enormous cost. Exact numbers are impossible to establish, but in 4 days' fighting, the coalition armies suffered at least 52,000 casualties. Napoleon, who could less afford such losses, came off worse. 47,000 killed and wounded, 35,000 taken prisoner, 325 guns lost. More men were killed.
On top of the already, 95% of his horses, you know what I'm saying, and his empire pretty much gone because he took them essentially all into Russia, and they all died. That shit is just crazy.
Killed and wounded at Leipzig than in any European battle before the First World War. Sir George Jackson, the British ambassador to Austria, rode over the battlefield with Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister, 2 days later. "A more revolting and sickening spectacle I never beheld," he wrote. "Scarcely could we move forward a step without passing over the dead body of some poor fellow, gashed with wounds and clotted with blood, another perhaps without an arm or a leg, here and there a headless trunk, or a head only, which caused our horses to stumble or start aside. It made one's blood run cold to glance upon the upturned faces of the dead. We got over this field of glory as quickly as we could."
Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. A freaking battlefield, especially a freshly soldered battlefield, is definitely a hard reality. Just a dead body in general. If you've never seen a dead body, it's just something about it. It's just, I don't know. But to see a whole battlefield of it is just, you know what I'm saying? You have to be very strong to be able to even walk through it. Just, Yeah.
We got over this field of glory as quickly as we could.
Yeah, what do you expect, Napoleon? You drug an entire freaking continent into war for well over 20 years. You know what I'm saying? Like the French Revolution already started it, and you just ran with it, and you never stopped. You never cared about anybody, and the fact that, again, all these wars took place on outside of France's borders, which means you pretty much everybody else when it came to all the other countries around you who were trying to be your ally. You know what I'm saying? Those were, you know what I'm saying? Just one of those things. That was cute.
Napoleon had suffered a calamitous defeat. He had lost the battle for Germany. His domination of Europe appeared at an end. With 80,000 survivors, he began a fighting retreat to the French border. There was now no chance of rescue for the 100,000 men trapped in garrisons across Germany and Poland, though some would hold out for another 5 months. Marshal Murat took his leave of the Emperor, assuring him of his loyalty, but secretly planning to cut a deal with the Allies to save his throne in Naples. It was the last time the two men saw each other. 11 days after the Battle of Leipzig, Napoleon's former allies, the Bavarians, tried to block his escape at Hanau with 40,000 men. The Bavarian commander, von Wrede, had served with Napoleon in many campaigns. But on seeing his deployment for battle, Napoleon remarked, "I made him a count, but I couldn't make him a general." The French Emperor then ordered the Imperial Guard to lead an attack that forced the enemy to fall back in disarray. The French army reached the safety of Mainz 3 days later. Napoleon himself pushed on to Paris to contain the political damage from his defeat. Behind him, his empire was being dismantled. On the 4th of November, the coalition announced the dissolution of the Confederation of the Rhine. Several of its former members...
Yeah, you already know that was going to come super quick, especially with Austria. You know that was going to be one of the first concessions to come on, especially with the fact that they already pretty much got Poland back to its pre-war state of not even being a state anymore.
Federation of the Rhine. Several of its former members now joining the war against France. In the Illyrian provinces, local revolts, Austrian invasion, and British naval support brought an end to French rule. In North Italy, Eugene was retreating steadily before the advance of von Hiller's Austrian army. While in Hamburg, Marshal Davout, with 34,000 troops, would soon be cut off and under siege. Napoleon's situation was desperate. But in the next campaign, fought for France itself, Napoleon would prove that he was still the master of war.
Alright guys, we'll go ahead and end it right there. So yeah, another great Napoleonic video. I definitely love these. I definitely love learning about Napoleonic wars and all that stuff, and just really interesting history and stuff like that. Without further ado though, guys, thank you again for joining me in another episode of Mike's Intellectual Corner. If you guys liked it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys when I see you. I'm out. Peace.